Hello, good evening and welcome. I'm Karima Brown and you're watching Political Exchange, where we unpack Africa's political economy. Developments in Egypt is very fluid following the removal from power by the army of Mohamed Mursi, the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, who became president after the removal of Mubarak, who ruled for more than 20 years. And of course, we've seen conflicting ideas about what happened in the removal of Mursi, some claiming that it was a coup, others saying that he had not been able to get the majority of Egyptians behind him and that they were justified in their actions in removing him. Trying to unpack the situation there and looking at some of the complex underlying issues, I'm now joined in the studio by the director of the Afro-Middle East Center, Naeem Jinnah. Naeem, thank you so much for joining us here on Political Exchange. Of course, very fluid, very much in the minds of everyone at the moment. We've got, many people argue there are three currents, political currents in Egypt. You have your secularists, you have your Islamists, and then of course you have your old order kind of military types of institutions. We've seen the world very much divided on whether this was a coup or not. Many people were saying that, if the army rolls down the tanks and closes down newspapers and television stations and arrests an elected president, it is a coup. From your perspective, was the manner in which Mursi was removed justified, given the fact that he did come across as quite a polarizing figure in Egyptian politics, particularly post the Mubarak era?
Well, let me say that Mursi certainly wasn't a great president. I mean, I think that he kind of came in with no experience of that. I mean, certainly in South Africa, the ANC came into government like that as well, but he didn't do a great job, right? We can speak about what the reasons were and what his challenges were, but he didn't do a great job as president. And so a year after he assumed power, there was this great call, huge call, millions of people literally on the streets asking for him to step down or to call fresh elections. And then you had the army stepping in. Now, the right of people to call on their government or to call on the president to step down or to protest that he or she is not doing a good job and is not delivering, etc., of course, is a right that's guaranteed, and that must be supported. However, what the result of that, perhaps not the result of that, but using that opportunistically, the army stepped in a way, fairly kind of classical coup.
Yes.
They kicked out the president, they put in a new president of their own, they arrested 300 of the old president's associates, shut down TV channels, etc. And then, to protect the coup, in a sense, you found the massacre 2-3 days ago, more than 50 people being killed on the streets in a protest. And you're going to find that kind of thing is continuing. To entrench the idea that it's a coup. We'll see by tomorrow when Biblawi actually appoints his new cabinet, who he appoints in that cabinet. But we have a situation now where the Mubarak appointed Prosecutor General has been restored to his post,
right.
Where the president appointed by the army is someone from Mubarak's era, where the Prime Minister is from Mubarak's era and was a minister when the military council ran the country. So in essence, what you find in not just a coup, but a reversal
right.
of the revolution.
That is actually quite an interesting point, because I wanted to pick up on that. A lot of the secularists have justified their anti-Mursi action off the back of him not being a president that could unite all Egyptians, particularly people from different political traditions, people who are not comfortable with Egypt being an Islamist country from a government point of view. How have they responded to the interim measures subsequent to the removal of Mursi by the army? We know that they rejected some of the proposals. They argued that they weren't consulted. But are they being flat-footed? Are they going to be outmaneuvered again by people who effectively held control of not just Egypt's political system, but also its economic system?
As much as I hate to say it, I think that is what we're seeing unfolding. That those millions of people that came out onto the street actually are being outmaneuvered right now. And let me just say that, you said 3 currents in Egyptian society, actually 4. I mean, the one is the Mubarak remnants,
Right.
including the judiciary and the army. And on the other side, there's the Islamists, the liberals, and the leftists.
Right.
And many, particularly from the left, from the time that the coup took place, have been expressing unhappiness.
Right.
Even the Tamarrud movement and National Salvation Front, largely liberals,
Yes.
over the past 2 or 3 days have been unhappy, especially after Adli Mansour, the new president, issued his own decree. And of course,
Acting very much like Mursi.
he now has more power than Mursi ever did,
Yes, yes.
even with his last year's decrees, and saying, well, they were not consulted. My question would be, didn't you expect this to happen after you trumpeted the military taking over the government? Didn't you expect that they're going to entrench themselves?
Right.
And then the head of the army, Sisi, made a statement yesterday saying that their process is unfolding and they're not going to tolerate anyone trying to disrupt it. In my mind, a direct reference to Tamarrud and the National Salvation Front.
Let's unpack the army, Naeem. The army is the largest recipient of US funds. Second largest. It is highly linked to US interests. Many of its officer corps get trained by the US Army. There's a very good, fraternal relationship. But the army isn't just held up in the military. They have tentacles all over in Egyptian society. Despite the fact that the bottom has fallen out of the economy of Egypt, you see them in very key sectors in the economy as well. Unpack their motives, besides wanting to restore all old order arrangements. They obviously need to move beyond Mubarak, and that process has been interrupted in some senses. What is it, from where you're sitting, that they are trying to reconstruct? What is the project of the army in Egypt?
Well, I mean, you're correct about the field of the operations, to use a military term. The military has literally been controlling Egypt for the past 60 years, politically, but also economically. I mean,
Yes.
they own 40% of Egypt's economy.
Yes, and it's a point that's not often brought out in analysis, because that gives them a very real economic imperative beyond law and order issues, because
Yes.
they're always projected as if they are above the political fray of the various currents that you have in Egypt.
Yeah, not so. I mean, everything from agriculture to manufacturing and all of that. So there's a number of imperatives for them. One is that the most important objective for them is to maintain the position of the military, right? So even when Mursi came into power, he had to play this game and make some deals with the army because of their all-powerfulness. And one of those deals was something that they insisted on, was that the military draws up its own budget, which budget is not subject to any kind of transparency. So the rest of the state has no clue what the budget of the military looks like, what it spends on, where its money actually comes from, etc.
How does a proposal like that pass a series of political actors claiming that their agenda is the rebirth of the Egyptian democratic project? How does that happen?
Because in Egypt, it's very difficult to undermine the army in that kind of way. I mean, that would be, in a sense, going to war with the army, right? And so it was accepted. It was accepted by the Islamists, who were the ones most repressed by the military in the past. But they accepted it because that was the only way to move forward. Mursi foolishly thought that when he replaced the head of the military, Tantawi, with Sisi, that he now was taking charge in some way. Sisi is the one who kicked him out, of course.
I mean, people who look at statecraft will talk here about deep state theories, states within states. And literally what you're explaining is that despite the supposed opening up of Egyptian society, what you're actually seeing behind that is a steel barrier of control at various critical levers of power, real power, economic power, military might, that has remained largely unchanged, isn't it?
Yes, very much so. So in a sense, you have three important instruments here. The military itself, and all that it represents with its economic power, etc. The party that it created, the National Democratic Party, which after Mubarak fell was banned.
Yes.
But people from that party are now running the government, right? And the third area was the security forces, the Interior Ministry, the intelligence services, and all of that. And between the three of them, they were completely penetrated into society. I mean, the intelligence agents in Egypt were very much penetrated into universities, into communities, into mosques.
Listening
and all
society.
of that. Exactly, right? And that's part of that deep state. That can't simply be uprooted because people came out into the street or because you had a democratic election.
Or because Mubarak was removed from office.
Exactly. And so they are now there and they're now coming out of their depth, in a sense, out of their deep state that they were in for the past year, and playing various kinds of roles in some ways in destabilizing the state, in destabilizing various forms of the opposition, firstly the Islamists, but also the other side, the people that took to the streets in their millions, also being, there's agents provocateurs involved there. I mean, just one example. In 2011, in the uprisings, there were lots of sexual harassment that took place.
Yes.
What you saw over the past week...
It was almost orchestrated campaigns.
Orchestrated and much, much more, exponentially higher than what you saw in 2011. And reports are of groups of people, groups of men with specific objective and specific methodology of how women are being harassed. And it seems almost as if this is planned from somewhere, that people are sent out to do this. Some of the other incidents around what we might think as agents provocateurs, and I think that what we're seeing is that those Mubarak era elements, whether they within the army or the intelligence services,
they're just
are now
re-infiltrating
coming,
themselves.
Re-infiltrating and trying to create a situation where people say, God, please give us the army.